All right, we are back. Let's see who are the hardcore D&D folks that are still here. I'm just taking a look. Peter is back. Yay, Peter's here. I see Keegan. Nice. There's Jesse. Don is back. All right, room's starting to fill up. Who's got the robot cat? Jamie D. Very nice. All right. Okay, everybody. I just want to thank all of you so much for being here, for participating in this event. Many of you know that this is not typical at all with TLDC. Like a lot of the events the events that I produce are like the next one is going to be talent development, and we've done some on just instructional design basics, and we have done stuff on gamification, and of course women of L&D, the accessibility event. We've done a DEI event. We do stuff that I think is probably more standard and practical, but this D&D one really came from it was just an idea. Don helped build it out, and I'm so glad that all of you that are here participated in it, and hopefully we'll be doing more of this type of thing. Just talking to Tristin, I was telling Tristin that I would love to see the speakers of this event actually play, doing something. It doesn't even have to be D&D. It could be something else entirely. So, Don, Keegan, I don't know. Tell me what you think. But I want to introduce our final speaker, Tristin Sylvester. Tristin is the brain behind Inventio Learning Designs, LLC, bringing a fresh spin to e-learning from Magnolia, Texas. When she's not crafting top-notch instructional designs or playing with the latest tech tools, she's diving into epic Dungeons and Dragons adventures. As a seasoned player, creative dungeon master, and enthusiastic admin of the play-by-post D&D server Saventra, Tristin brings a spirit of adventure, strategy, and community to her work. So yeah, let's begin. Tristin, I'm going to go ahead and hide myself from the screen and let you take over.
Awesome. Thank you so much. As you mentioned, I'm Tristin. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And just to give a physical description, I am a white, feminine presenting female. I have my brown hair tied back, and I'm wearing gaming headphones with a pair of black rimmed glasses. I'm wearing a black t shirt with the Inventio logo on it, and I'm surrounded by a fantastical background. Let me get my screen share going here. All right, is everybody able to see that? Perfect. So today I am doing a session on xAPI and character sheets. So how these both have a unique way of crafting a path forward that's going to be different for every player or every learner. And so to start off with, just to talk a little bit about me, since I'm your guide on this quest, so to speak, as it was mentioned, I am the owner of Inventio Learning Designs. It's a business that I started at the beginning of this year. I've been freelancing for a while, decided I kind of wanted to step out on my own, make my own mark. And of course, I am a D&D player and dungeon master. I've been playing for a long time. Started DMing about 4 or 5 years ago. And then this is brought up, I think, in J Rock's session yesterday, but the pandemic changed a lot of things for those of us that play D&D, in that we couldn't really meet in person anymore. And through that, I discovered playing D&D play by post, which essentially equates to playing on an online server like Discord, which is where I play. And instead of sitting down and playing for a couple of hours at a time, and then taking a break, coming back to it later, you're pretty much always playing. You can log in at any time, you can be active in a quest, you can be active in a city, but essentially, whenever you have time to check in and update your posts, you do so. And when discovering this, level one players pretty much have very little that you're able to do. You usually have maybe 1 to 2 attacks. If you're a spellcaster of some kind, you have very little to work with. But as you start to level up in D&D, one thing is the complexity of the things you're able to do goes on a really epic trajectory. And when you're playing online, this kind of equates to, instead of having to run one line of code, now you have 10 things that you're trying to do all at once. Your player can do an attack and then they're adding bonuses from 5 or 6 different sources. Well, all this to say, D&D is really what started me on my coding journey because work smarter, not harder. There's a way to write code so that when you're playing D&D online, instead of having to run all 10 of those lines of code, you can create an alias, which allows you to run one code, does all those things for your player. Now, this coding for D&D, specifically on Discord play, involves using JavaScript. And so that's really when I started getting into JavaScript and learning how to not only use that for D&D, but implement it into the e-learnings I was creating, both using JavaScript to make really complex animations, but more so JavaScript to help me with writing xAPI statements. So what is this session about? Well, to start off with, we're going to talk a little bit about what xAPI is in broad terms, a little bit about the history behind it, and then we're going to kind of see how xAPI and D&D can really be compared to one another, and talk about what xAPI can do to enable more personalized learning experience for the people that you're creating these experiences for. And then once we've kind of wrapped our brains around all of that, I'm going to give you guys a scenario, and together we're going to brainstorm some ways that we could use xAPI in that scenario to create individualized or personalized learning experiences. So just to start off with a little bit about xAPI, we know kind of in our industry a little bit that when we see that X, generally that stands for experience. So xAPI is Experience API. And I like to start off with a little bit about history to give some context of where this came from. And ADL, which is the organization that's kind of the keepers, if you will, of SCORM, started to realize after probably the fourth version of SCORM 2004 got released that there were a lot of limitations within SCORM and started thinking about what the next edition would look like. So they put out some papers looking for anybody that wanted to be helping with that. And Rastisi Software were actually the ones that applied and were chosen to work on this project. And they called the project Project Tin Can. And really, the name Tin Can came from, back in the day, you'd have two cans attached by string and you could talk through one end, listen through the other. And it really meant to represent having a two-way conversation between Rastisi Software and the industries that were using SCORM in order to find out what was the path forward going to look like. So, in broad terms, what's xAPI? I like to call xAPI the storyteller of the learning world. We're not just looking at what our learners are doing, but we're also getting context. We're looking at the how they're doing it and the why they're doing it. And so it gives us a lot of information about what our learners are doing, where they're doing it, how they're doing it, and that can help us as this industry moves more into a data focused arena. And to really understand SCORM, like I mentioned, or xAPI, sorry, like I mentioned, this is started as a project to look at the next generation of SCORM. So it's really helpful to compare xAPI to SCORM and kind of talk about those two together. And I like to use the analogy of SCORM was a paper map. xAPI is using Waze or Google Maps. SCORM allowed us to have a common language that could be used across various learning management systems, which was a huge step up from what we had before, and allowed us to measure to some degree what our learners were doing. But we were very limited in the sense that you could measure essentially four things: what they had opened, what courses they were looking at, whether they were progressing through the course, not how far, just were they clicking through, and then whether they had completed it and passed it. And passed it had pretty much two very specific definitions. Pass could mean they looked at a certain number of slides out of the total, or they got a certain quiz score that you set ahead of time. But that's really pretty much the limits of the information that you could gather through SCORM. xAPI is a lot different. xAPI pretty much doesn't have, as long as it's done in technology somehow, doesn't really have a limit of what data you can collect. It also allows you to assign different definitions. So pass could mean more than just a quiz score or a certain number of slides based on whatever criteria you give it. So going back to our analogy, the map, paper map, SCORM, you can absolutely find a pathway forward. You can look at your start and end points and you can pick the road you're going to take. With Waze, you're given traffic alerts, you're given information about road closures in real time that allow you to adjust and compensate for different factors. And so that's really kind of an apt comparison between xAPI and SCORM. So, what are the benefits? Well, I said obviously we're allowed to collect a lot more data, but we're also allowed to assign our own meaning to that data. And so, as we collect this, we can in real time make data driven decisions. We can use it to help customize the learning pathways that our learners are taking. And it gives us the ability to actually measure learning, or at least deeper measurements of learning than we currently have. And it kind of brings me to the point of learning versus compliance. And a lot of people have made this point recently on LinkedIn, and other people have talked about this, but what SCORM really measures is compliance. We've all sat through an e learning course where we clicked as fast as humanly possible through to the quiz, took our quiz, and ended it. That passing score that we received that, was given to our LMS in no way indicated any kind of learning. Instead, it just indicated compliance. And really, what our industry has been moving towards for some time is making data driven decisions and trying to actually measure the learning impact that we have. And a topic that we're not going to get into, because today we're going to be kind of looking at this through the lens of e learning specifically, but this goes far beyond e learning. You can use xAPI to track your learners in terms of what YouTube videos they've watched, or if your organization happens to have a subscription to LinkedIn Learning, you can see what LinkedIn Learning courses people within your organizations have completed. And there's a lot more broad things that you can do. So there's a lot more that you can measure and make decisions based out of other than just the e-learning that you have within your learning management software. And xapi.com is the website that really kind of houses all the information about xAPI. And they have a graphic there that talks about learning doesn't just happen within an e-learning course housed in your learning management system. Learning happens everywhere. And xAPI really does enable us to gather data about all of those different forms of learning, not just e-learning. So we talked a little bit of xAPI and where it came from, but what xAPI is generally made out of is an xAPI statement. So before we start talking more about this, I kind of want to see in the chat, anybody know about what an xAPI statement is or know how to compare it to anything before I talk about it? Just trying to see where our level of knowledge is at. Okay, so we have various levels here, but a lot more on the low side. When I'm trying to explain xAPI to somebody that isn't super familiar with it, but is familiar with e learning development, when we talk about within, for example, Storyline, you can use variables, which are created kind of in the same structure as coding is. And coding essentially breaks down into if one thing happens, another happens based on that, right? If it doesn't happen, then this other thing happens. xAPI statements are somewhat similar to that. But what they're really doing is conveying an experience that has occurred. So we generate these statements to run when something happens. And it's going to collect data in the form of a simple xAPI statement, which is essentially actor, verb, object. actor being who's doing something, verb being what they're doing, and object with what. This is far different from SCORM framework. And to give you an example here, we could say a simple xAPI statement would be Sally experienced an xAPI PDF. But within that, generally more data is collected than just that. When we talk about Sally, we're not just collecting their name, Sally. Generally, this is tied back to an email within the organization. It could be tied back to an ID number, but we're actually referencing exactly which Sally we're talking about. We're going to skip the verb for now and come back to that in a second. Then xAPI PDF is just the name of something. Within your xAPI statement, you can make that object called whatever you'd like it to be called. And then you tie it back to a real world thing. Are they opening an actual PDF? Or is it something that they have to download? What have you? So, verbs. There's a lot of really common verbs that exist. Experienced is just one example for them, but completed, passed, failed, mastered, responded, commented. There's a big old library of them. But what's super interesting is yes, the word experienced has an inherent meaning to us, right? But when you're using it within an xAPI statement, the meaning of it actually is whatever you want it to be. So, what I mean by that is in people that use xAPI, we come up with literally kind of, I call it my cookbook. And within that, I have recipes. Because when you use a verb, you have to understand what you mean by that verb. Yes, it has an inherent meaning, but you're assigning a meaning within your own organization or within your own e learnings. So, for example, if I want to measure when somebody has watched a video, when the video ends, I can create an xAPI statement that uses the verb experienced. And from that point forward, anytime I am creating xAPI statements for watching a video, I would use that verb experience because that's the one that I chose and that's the meaning that I gave it. Another organization could use experienced entirely differently. Maybe they use that to indicate somebody downloaded something. Essentially, this is collecting data for you in whatever form you want it, and then you're analyzing it later after the fact. So whatever you want to call something's up to you. There are libraries of commonly used xAPI verbs. You can find a lot of those at xapi.com/libraries. And something that I want to talk to here before people freak out and leave, you do not have to know coding to use xAPI. And I think that's a huge barrier to people that are interested in it and don't want to get involved. But with a lot of the updates that have been made to e-learning authoring tools like Storyline, Captivate, I believe Lectora as well, they have inherent ways to create xAPI statements. In Storyline, for example, you literally create a trigger to run an xAPI statement. It's right there in the list of things that you can choose to create a trigger from. Well, how do I know how to write this code? How do I know how to write this statement? Well, fun fact, if you're not a coder, there's also xAPI statement generators where you go in, fill in a form, essentially telling it what you want it to use, and it generates everything for you. So, great entry point for sure, Wendy, absolutely, for somebody who's interested in coding. But there's a way to get your feet wet without being intimidated by not knowing JavaScript, right? Okay, so that's enough about xAPI for now. Let's talk about the thing that I actually love, which is Dungeons and Dragons. So as I mentioned, longtime player, DM, but for those that aren't super familiar with it, just giving a brief overview so we can tie these things together. Dungeons and Dragons is a TTRPG or a tabletop role playing game. But like I mentioned, it can now be played online. People play it virtually through Zoom. There's all kinds of ways. We ran sessions in the pre conference for this. So there's lots of ways to play, but traditionally, these types of games are called tabletop role playing games. And the way that I like to define Dungeons and Dragons to friends as I'm trying to convince them to play with me is that it's a collaborative storytelling game. I know some old school D&D players where, Dungeon Master is the boss and railroads people into doing things they don't want to do. But to me, the heart of D&D or the best D&D games are those that are a collaboration between the two different roles that exist at the table. So, first role are our players. Players create their own unique characters that are essentially the main characters within a story. They work together as a party and they face challenges together. They build relationships with one another and they grow. And at the heart of this is customization. So, one thing I like to talk about is why Dungeons and Dragons has gotten so popular in recent years. And I believe J Rock talked about this in his session yesterday as well. Is that with the release of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, where the mechanics or the gameplay was simplified, we've also seen an explosion of more source material. And within that source material, we've seen a lot more options for player classes, character traits, backgrounds, all kinds of new things are coming out, and it allows this really massive level of player customization. And the best example that I can give you for this one is, two people both want to be a rogue. Okay. Rogue is my favorite class to play. They're often referred to as the skill monkey. But there's several different subclasses of rogues. You could be a rogue who's a pirate. You could be a rogue who's a thief. You could be a rogue who's also part caster, which is called an arcane trickster. We've already got vast differences there. Then the skills that each of them chooses, vastly different. Backgrounds, different. So there's a lot of customization, and you could basically create your character to be pretty much whatever you want it to be. Now, the second role at our table is our dungeon master. And if players are the main characters of the story, then dungeon masters are the world that they exist in. And to me, a good dungeon master is the one who creates something that's super immersive for their players. We good now? Okay. Whew. Gotta love when technology fails you. So not sure where I cut out, but essentially the point of this presentation is really taking that character customization aspect of D&D and comparing it to using xAPI to customize learning for our learners. So how do these worlds intersect or how are they parallel with one another? Well, there's a lot of similarities between the two. You know, customization is a huge aspect of both character creation and the realm of D&D, but it also has a lot to do with the pathways that we create through xAPI. We'll talk a little bit more about how we create those pathways in a bit, but really what we're doing is customizing based on data that we've gotten through insights, just like a DM would customize the story that they're telling based on the specific abilities and traits that their players have. So, digging a little deeper, we know in Dungeons and Dragons, a good dungeon master should tailor their quest challenges to their character's skill sets. What I mean by this is if you have a party of players and they don't have a tank, you're not going to hit them quite as hard as a party that has a couple of beefy boys to stand in front of everybody. You look at what level each character is and you adjust what creatures, what monsters they face accordingly. In that same way, we can unlock magic, so to speak, by using xAPI and measuring essentially what our learners are experiencing and use that information to align them with things that fit their personalities, things that fit their preferred methods of learning, or even their experience level. The way I like to think of this is being able to assign learner experiences to your learner based on their character sheet. When you're using xAPI and all this code is set up, you can set retrieval codes that give people the experience based on what data is already existing for that user. So, three main things I want to talk about using xAPI to track, right? So, first one is real time assessment data. We've talked a lot about customizing for the learner, but also, just like in D&D, you assess things as the whole. You look at how the group is performing. And also, you can look at maybe your players. If they're all not seeming to have a good time, it's probably not them, it's probably you. And so, real time assessment, xAPI lets us gather data pretty much instantaneously and then track that data and make responses to it, just like as things happen within a quest, a DM would adjust. You start to notice that in an e learning, you're collecting information on each question as to what answer choice they chose. And when I'm looking at the data from everybody who is assigned that course and notice they're all choosing the same wrong answer choice, that's a problem with my question, not necessarily a problem with, the learner themselves. So we get real-time assessment that we can use to respond. Going back to the player specifically, we have individualized insights. We can look at how each learner experiences learning, not just through e-learning, but we can look at, do they choose to always click through videos and not watch them all the way? Well, that person probably doesn't like videos very much. If they tend to, always go through scenarios in a certain way, we can track that information. And it kind of showcases their unique journeys and their achievements, just like D&D would. And then the last one's skill mastery training. Just like in D&D, as you experience challenges and, persevere, you level up. With xAPI, we can use these statements to monitor skill acquisition and mastery and use those to assign information accordingly. So I've been talking for a while and I don't want to anymore. So I am going to set this up. Let me make sure that it's running. I'd like you guys, if you can, to log on to either using your computer or phone, log on to menti.com and use the code that you see on the screen and answer the question in the context of e-learning, which aspect of personalized learning that we've talked about appeals to you the most. Let me just make sure that this is working correctly. Okay. So getting individualized insights, great. Tailoring learners to their preferred style, personalized learning path, training audiences of mixed abilities, absolutely. Working at your own pace. All of these are great. And this really is, honestly, a lot of what we've been talking about and a lot of why xAPI, honestly, so much better than Scorn. Customize the data we're looking for. Absolutely. In certain scenarios, you might be, we call it in D&D play testing when new material comes out, but this is even applicable before you release it. A lot of times I know people have a um, period where they have people test out e-learning and see how that was. You could be gathering data based on that as well. Awesome. Oop, that did not work the way I wanted it to. Okay, great. So I like to think of using xAPI and kind of using the analogy of a building. And anytime you're deploying any kind of e-learning, you have to have a strong foundation. And for me, within the context of e-learning, that means a really good, solid e-learning. The content is good, the interaction is good, it works correctly. You have to have that solid foundation first. If you're going to be measuring data, then you have to make sure that you're collecting data based on something that is legitimate. Just like in D&D, this would be the DM kind of setting the scene, making sure that everybody understands what it is they're interacting with, where they're at. And really the goal here, or the roof that we're looking for, is empowered learning. And when I mean empowered learning, I really look at learners being able to kind of take center stage in their own journey, right? This also can be tied back to buy-in from your learners. And we do this through the two pillars that hold this building up, which are feedback and mastery. Starting with feedback, we're not just collecting data for the sake of collecting data most of the time, right? We're analyzing that data because we want to know something. And taking that a step further with xAPI, we can then give detailed feedback. If we notice a certain learner always seems to struggle with a certain topic, then we can have xAPI statements that help give them resources to better themselves. Or if they've done really well in a certain area, giving them that feedback that results in, you know, reflects that result as well. The other pillar is measuring mastery. This is kind of where we talked about having those adaptable learning experiences, using xAPI in such a way that you can track people's abilities just like you would in a D&D game, and maybe not challenge them with the same things anymore. And so going back to that buy-in that I referenced, we all know when we talked about learning versus compliance earlier, we've all been guilty, don't say you haven't, of clicking through an e-learning that you didn't want to do to get to the quiz so that you could finish it and be done. Maybe it was something that you have to do every single year, not because of compliance, but maybe they force you to do it all the time. Okay. Every single year, you got to do the same training. You've seen it 52 times. They've never changed it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, what if you customize this? You notice that, you know, Sally, back to our example earlier, she's expert level. We've measured her mastery. She's done this certain training X number of times. Now we have xAPI that is going to only force her to look at the new slides, only give her the updates. Well, now Sally's got more buy-in because when she's assigned something, she knows this is only the stuff that's applicable to me. I'm not being assigned things that I've already done before. Once I've proven that I'm good at that, I don't have to do it anymore. So you get a more empowered learner. Not only do they have more control, they also have more buy-in because this is personalized to them. So to kind of round things out here before I get to my Q&A portion of it is I wanted to do kind of an interactive thought exercise and just using the example of a yearly sales training. So just want you to guys to imagine that you're all in charge of designing the annual sales training program and you've got a diverse sales team including people of various levels. So you've got your rookies, you've got your intermediates, you've got your veterans, right? So the question that I want to pose to you guys is how could you use xAPI statements? Not looking for the statements, just how could you use them to ensure that every learner, regardless of their experience level, is going to benefit from your training, especially if you have a changing product line and changes within your sales process. And just because we have some people that are relatively inexperienced, I wanted to give you a little bit of help. I want you to consider how you could use those to both to tailor the training experience and provide a personalized learning path. And think about it with these things in mind. So I'll give you guys a few minutes to consider those questions that I have there under application. And I'd like to see in the chat some ideas on what you would do within your e-learning in order to use those xAPI statements. Wendy said branching, absolutely. A diagnostic to test out for sure. Okay, we have one that says, I would want to see if people are demonstrating the learned behavior after the training, but I don't know how xAPI statements would track that. Well, it does have to have, like I said, some tie to technology to be able to track this, but maybe you could have a system where if they get some sort of review, maybe they're a sales, professional that has a way for their clients to review how they did. That could be a way that you gather data based on the reviews that they get. Like I said, this has a huge application well outside of e-learning. If you have a Google's review, they have API for that as well. You could gather their cumulative, rating, so to speak, from their clients. Okay, I haven't seen anything about that last bullet. What are some ideas about providing additional resources or coaching? How do we think we could use xAPI to do that? Yeah, certain amount of actions wrong. See more resources. Yeah, absolutely. Triggers to alert the training department. Yeah, big brother watching over you for sure. Just in time resources. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we do have the capability within most authoring tools to, if somebody gets a question wrong, to give them feedback based on that wrong answer and guide them back to information. But you can also use this using xAPI statements because right now, if you do it within that native authoring tool, it's only happening to the learner at that time. We're not recording that information. So xAPI allows us to still do that same thing, but then we have the data to look at it later and see how many questions did they get wrong. You could even measure elapsed time on a slide. Did they only spend a certain amount of time in that section and that's why they got things wrong? Or were they in that section for the whole 30 minutes and they still missed every question? You can use this to get a much fuller picture of what your learner is experiencing. API could detect past struggle and focus learning in those areas. Absolutely. This has a greater application beyond just a single e learning course, right? We can look at somebody who's really proficient at sales and assign them something maybe that's more advanced. If we've got somebody who's a rookie, we can assign them things based on the scores or the topics that they specifically missed. And the nice thing is it takes a lot of upfront work to code all of this or to generate these statements in a code generator. But once all that upfront work is done, you can force xAPI statements to do all of this for you. Awesome. So I made sure to leave some time at the end here just to see if you guys had some questions for me, anything that you wanted to discuss. Does xAPI act like a database in a sense? Sort of. So we didn't get into, because we weren't talking really too much about the coding aspect of it, but the thing that is going to be drastically different from just publishing to SCORM, right? Because most of the time you publish from your authoring tool to SCORM, you get a zipped package, you drag that and drop it into your LMS, and you're done. For xAPI to work correctly, you have to have something other than an LMS to store this data. That's generally referred to as an LRS, and this is just a repository for all the data to get stored. And so, yes, essentially you would have a LRS that you could access that would be able to pull up the data. You could pull it up based on a certain course, you could pull it up based on a certain user, but it's basically, yeah, a big old database of just information. So, suggestions on steps to learn more. Even if you're not a huge coder, like I said, don't let that be a barrier to entry. A really, really important resource I would recommend is the xAPI cohort. This happens usually several times a year. I think they do it like every semester or so, but it's run by a lot of people that are even far more knowledgeable than me about xAPI. And essentially, it starts you at the very beginning of what xAPI is, and you go through weekly sessions, and you can even join a group and work on projects together. They have, I know, a Slack that they use for the xAPI cohort. It's free, so that's an awesome thing. So that's definitely a resource I'd check out. Some people that are very experienced in xAPI that I would follow. Jeff Batt is one of them. Megan Torrance is another. There's some great, great information. And then xapi.com. Easiest topic. Where do you go to learn about xAPI? xapi.com. They have a lot of information, a lot of the backstory that I told you. They go way into depth about the Tin Can project. And they explain exactly how statements work, how to write them, how to integrate them in other ways other than e-learning. So a lot of great information there. Awesome. Yes. Another thing that I would highly recommend, if you are interested in getting to, play around with xAPI, is if you don't already have a subscription, you can sign up for Squirm Cloud. It's free, but it gives you essentially a back end area where you can test packages. These could be Squirm, these could be xAPI packages, and it gives you a free LRS that you can use to see if the xAPI statements you created are collecting the data the way that you wanted them to. So that's another really good resource if you're going to kind of go at it on your own. But that is all I've got.
I was trying to figure out where, what, like, because I know the guild bought the xAPI cohort from Megan Torrance, but
Yes.
what I could find was it looks like this week on Thursday they're having their xAPI party because it looks like the latest cohort started in August.
Yeah, I think
So
the fall semester one wrapped up.
yeah, so if you're interested in that, there's the link to that. Um, I've never attended any of those. Megan has been a guest on TLDC like multiple times. She's absolutely lovely. Just saw her last week. Um, but I'm not sure how much she does with the cohort anymore. But that's
She's
just
still
because
she's still there a fair amount. I mean, the nice thing about the cohort is it's when you have time. It's free. They open it up to anybody to hop in whenever they'd like. And so I've kind of been hit or miss on the sessions. They do record all of them as well. But yeah, Megan's usually there a fair amount, and she at least
cool.
presents once or twice. So appreciate you guys sticking around with me to close out this event. Thank you so much for putting this on. And here's my contact info. You can scan any of the QR codes to be brought to my website, my LinkedIn page, or to open an email for me.
Excellent. Tristin, thank you so much. I'm still so curious about what you do on Discord.
Sure.
Yeah. And so at some point I want to follow up and find out about that. But this is the thing. I honestly feel like this event is still not quite complete. So I don't know. I want to see some more gaming. Just because I think that that is a huge part of this whole thing. And on Friday, the two games that we did have were great. But I don't know. I would love to like watch some of you more seasoned players play, like Wendy saying same. Um, so we're gonna have to plan that. And in fact, I'm probably gonna hit up
Yeah, I know
Dawn.
Dawn said she's in. I'm in.
Yeah,
I'll
I would.
play.
Yeah,
Is
and
Keegan
I
still
think
here? I
yeah, I'm
saw
not
Keegan
sure.
was here earlier.
Yeah, I saw. Yeah, yeah. I think that
Yeah, get Keegan in on there.
because I think watching some seasoned players, especially seasoned instructional designers too. I mean, you could get even if Christy Tucker had time. I mean, come on, that'd be amazing. I mean, it was great having Clark Quinn in there, but if we watch some seasoned players play and then maybe talk about the overlap and anything else that comes to mind, I think that would be really cool. And yeah, I am up for, of course, trying to host it, but I don't know. Maybe I don't know if Dawn is still in, but I would need some help definitely rounding everything up. I'll be able to think about it better when I'm not like when I don't have this cold. So yeah, there you go, Jason. And we could have I have this platform, that I have access to. And so there's just some opportunities here. It also brings community together. It's a fun thing. So yeah, let's see if we can come up with something.
Well, and
I'm
I'll
up.
say from my perspective, just at large, I am a better writer. I am a better storyteller. I
Mhm.
create better scenarios because
Yes.
of D&D.
Yeah.
And it just, even though they're two drastically different environments, of course, like
Mhm.
they're really not all that dissimilar. And, to be a better storyteller, you have to tell more stories.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thanks for that, Peter. He's saying Tom did a great job of talking through the implementation, but a very specific scenario, more like that would be great. Um, let's figure something out. Yeah, we'll figure something out. And then also, Tristan, I need to, I'd love to see what you do on Discord just because I'm so fascinated by that particular platform and also just what the possibilities are because I think that is you are adminning a community as well, and that is
Yes.
something that I love to see and like to get experience with. So yeah, the event isn't over. Sorry
Yeah.
guys,
To
we're
make a
gonna do
D&D
something
reference,
else.
Discord can get very crunchy
Yeah, yeah,
depending on how many bots and what things you're running on there, but it can also be really simple too. So Discord's an awesome platform and I
nice.
recommend it for communities of any kind.
Okay. All right. Very cool. All right. So we're gonna continue this event at some point. And so everybody, if you want to be able to take a look at the recordings, you can just go back to the schedule and check those out. I'm not going to be closing this instance of this conference anytime soon. So more activity TBD, everyone. Yeah, longer
Taking a
session
brief
too, Vivian.
hiatus. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, we'll have to talk about it and see what we come up with. I have to get through Halloween here. I think we have some guests coming over, which we didn't expect. My wife just told me, so I can hear her with the leaf blower out there in the backyard, and um, so there's going to be all of that tonight. Everybody have a fun Halloween. If you celebrate it, I know that my kid, believe it or not, he's going as a dungeon master. I made him a necklace of dice and he's got a dragon on his shoulder and a big cloak and a helmet. And so, yeah, D&D is definitely in my world.
Yeah, mine as well. I didn't think of a costume far enough in advance, so I'm just going as Matt Mercer. I'm just going to wear a vest. Call it a day.
There you go. Nice. Love it. Love it. All right, everybody. Thanks again. Thanks for participating in the event. And we'll see you next time. Keep an eye out, thetldc.com, if you want to see more videos and stuff. And subscribe to the newsletter. I'm here every month. I try to do a live conference for everyone. But then looking forward to doing some gaming ahead very soon. Okay, closing it out. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.